now I will see.
But in fact, as long as there is no need to learn that discipline from the right-wingers, if you read every single autobiography by revolutionaries in Latin America and elsewhere, you find that that tension.
Totally agree. Even when I developed this in my book to confirm you, that famous speech of Che Guevara that everybody quotes about revolution love. Immediately afterwards, he goes precisely into this topic. Yeah. He was deeply aware of it.
Yeah, well, he knew. I mean,
and what
his sons, daughters, and so on.
And what I'm trying to tell you is that, don't misunderstand me. This doesn't mean that then you become some kind of without emotions killing monster or whatever. Sometimes this is the true heroism. No, you do something which takes you out in the sense, no return to normal life. And that's for me the true heroism. To, in a way, pathetically, to be a living death already, You renounce your right to live forever happily on whatever.
I have plenty of questions, but...
deep in your shitty mind.
Yeah, right. Sorry, but let us...
poetical expression.
Shit poetry. But let us open up the room for discussion. I mean, I'm sure there are quite a few things happened here today. So
maybe don't exaggerate.
Again, our friend.
Well, I just wanted to bring up the point again from yesterday, but I guess it relates. Yeah. I think it relates to what was said today as well. I think. Because I think that your point about like how this idea of self-reinvention and multiple identities and all this, how it fits in perfectly with capitalism. But I mean, my response to that would be that in this sense you are totally in agreement with Foucault. Like this isn't something where you're because to me what Foucault is saying is precisely that the struggle against power, that basically the subject is both the effect and instrument of power. So basically power constitutes multiple subjects, multiple identities. I mean, this is the core of his thesis in the history of sexuality.
In volume 1?
Yeah, in volume 1.
How then, I'm asking
he's denouncing the repressive hypothesis.
I know, but now I'm asking you a simple question which I don't get. I ask many Foucauldians and typically I always get different inconsistent answers. The crucial question is this one, the way I see it. Is there a break or not between, on the one hand, history and sexuality and before it, surveiller punir, what's the translation here? Control.
Discipline and punish.
Discipline and punish.
Sorry?
Discipline and punish.
Within that book and the way I see it, History of Sexuality, Volume 1, where you have this idea of, let's call it total immanence. Law itself produces its transgression and so on. And what happens in History of Sexuality, point 2 and 3. The way I see it is that, so will you then say that all this idea of aesthetic, self-creating, care of self, that this is just the way power reproduces itself through you?
But that's the thing. I think that the difference where there is perhaps tension between what you're saying and Foucault is in the sense that that he introduces an ambiguity into this relationship.
Can you be more precise here?
Sorry?
Can you be more precise here?
Well, the ambiguity is that power both creates the subject, but the subject can also at the same time invert that relationship and be an instrument of power. And that's why he says that power is everywhere and comes from everywhere.
Sorry, can you specify it? Because this is, sorry for interrupting, but I just want you to make it clear. Because you say power both creates the subject and makes the subject an instrument. Where is the tension here?
And then the subject can twist it back.
At the same time become an instrument of power as the subject created by power. I mean,
in what sense can he become an instrument of power? In the sense that he's just an instrument of power.
Going back to what somebody in the back yesterday was saying about India. because I think that what he was saying, the way I understood it, I think he was agreeing with me, but I think that perhaps...
He's here, so he might tell us if that's
the idea, I mean, this is how the British ruled India. I mean, for example, where I think Foucault is even more radical than you are in this sense. Like, I think he goes even further, because his hypothesis with respect to, although he doesn't specifically address it, but with respect to multiculturalism would be that it's not just that, you know, those in power use the ideology of multiculturalism to rule, but actually it was the technique of power, multiculturalism, even before it was the official ideology. So what the British did in India was effectively a kind of multiculturalism. Because
wait a minute, I've written about it, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, but
I have even a great source.
That to me would be a Foucauldian analysis.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, but that's my point, how to break out of it.
But, but this is what I'm saying, that what they did in India was basically emphasize local particular identities. You know, you are Sikh, they wouldn't speak to, you know, let's say, any pan-Indian representatives. They would only communicate and negotiate.
But now
okay, guys.
Now I come to a paradox. Would you agree?
Otherwise, you will talk forever.
The way to resist English was to return to them their own message, to become more like them. To say, no, we want our own United Nations state, and so on and so on. Well, that's the paradox.
No,
okay, shut up now. Enough. There you go.
This is the future of Venezuela and Chavez.
Well, there's one question of mine, but let me first clear the air a bit.
Now it's the India guy. I hate you. Now you will be like, as I already said, like in any call Marshall McLuhan. We about India, now you come and tell us the truth.
No, but I think...
My name is Dipesh Chakravarti.
No, don't say this, I will kill myself. Give me poison first,
Because, yes, British to a certain extent did manifest power through multicultural society, but what one needs... This is very easy these days, like when yesterday Zizek said about, if I go to India and talk about caste system, what then? Well, everybody talks about caste system because that's a set theory. But what we constantly reject, how did caste system begin? Let's be a bit like, shamelessly historicist out here. It's not that, God came down to it. We have to remember, Hinduism as a religion started off in the courts of the rulers. And when the British went to India, it wasn't a very communally divided country where, Hindus were fighting. That only happened in 1940s.
That's very important.
That only happened in 1940s. But the basic structure through which the British came into India, I'm sorry to disagree with half of the Indian critics out here, is not that. I find it extremely frustrating when people completely forget about that. There was a basic contract relationship, and there's a very good film actually by Satyajit Ray. It's called The Chess Player, and it's very well explained there. It was a simple contractarian relationship between the Hindu landlords and the Muslim princely states, and that was 50 years after the end of Mughal rule. And going back to the power of hegemony, power is everywhere. Yes, if we want to believe that power is everywhere, and Zizek was saying earlier today, that identity politics as such, if we have to look at identity politics as such, I'm sorry, in the last 200 years, I don't think identity politics has really moved in India. It has only changed its color. And to a certain extent, that's where my question to you is that when we were talking about Dipesh Chakravarti earlier, and there was this particular, I'm slightly confused about the universality hinging on a particular. And how does that, isn't that particular, they're saying, one of your lectures on alternate modernities, you say that fascism is one of the forms of alternate modernity.
Yeah.
And isn't that what exactly is happening in India or most of the third world countries where capitalism is just being given another, social capitalism, welfare capitalism, so on and so forth?
Yes, but nonetheless, I don't, basically I think yes, but nonetheless I don't know enough, and now I will be very frank without any bluffing. I don't know enough, and I'm afraid to say this because what I'm afraid is of a possible misunderstanding of me as a racist. I don't want to say, because I also don't mean it, that, you know, we in Europe can at least have a more democratic modernity. You primitive Indians, the only way you can do it is some kind of fascist modernity or whatever. I think the situation is much more open here. I mean, it's not predetermined. Maybe you will do the third one and so on. The only thing I don't agree is as if alternate modernity means we can really have an authentic other alternate modernity. I think, here I agree with Jameson, modernity is today another name for capitalism. And yes, in this sense, we are moving today towards multiple modernities. But this doesn't mean others will avoid. I mean, there will be new forms of authoritarian capitalism, and I'm here again extremely open. Maybe I think that maybe this would be almost my dream, that nonetheless in some, my hope are always countries not at the top and not at the bottom, but the second level countries, where, you know, not the most highly developed and not the poor. Maybe they will invent something else. What I fear is that more and more that my prediction is that for the next 15, 20 years, and that's why I'm definitely anti-racist here, I think that in the developed West, the democracy we are moving in the direction of Berlusconi, totally nonsense, and so on and so on. And what I see, this is why I'm so interested in Iran and things like that, although I hope you heard the news today, no? Khamenei did condemn it, prohibit, so Khamenei did fully support Ahmadinejad and so on. And so now we will see. But I agree with you, but what I'm saying is, on the one hand, what would be your position here? I want to avoid precisely what some critics accuse me of, this comfortable position of, you know, capitalism is here to stay, so we can't really do anything, let's just wait or whatever. What can we do? I think we can do it. I think that some kind of democratic initiatives, popular and so on, do open up a space to make at least to some account, as I said on that unfortunate communism conference against Badiou, to make the state itself function a little bit against itself and so on and so on. I see an opening. I don't think the conclusion should be here. For me, Badiou is too pessimist. When his position is capitalism rules absolutely, so the only thing is he dropped universalism. He even, I don't know if you listen to him carefully, the most sad things that Badiou said, and he feels bad about it. Later he told me he regretted it, is when he said, today there is no longer universal history, and with this he simply meant we no longer can have even a global notion of what goes on. This means he simply accepted capitalism as a universal background. You cannot fight it, it's here. All we can do is local action. You see an injustice here, you see it there. But for me, this is terrible if this is it. This is the end for me then. Then basically, you just, you know, do a small, then you end up where he is ending. Where it's very respectful. I admire him for what he's doing, in contrast to me and some others here who, I will openly say, we are this kind of hypocritical left, you know. You go to support the left United States, but you try to get business class ticket and so on, all the story, you know. But, I mean, I admire him. He's spending a lot of time, 2-3 times a week, hours teaching those sans-papiers, illegal immigrants. He is engaged. But this is the question I'm always asking him. This would be an example of his concrete, particular action. There are those sans-papiers, illegitimate immigrants, not only demand their full citizenship, but teach them how, and so on and so on. But isn't a paradox that a political philosopher whose entire theory is sustained by the premise of, as you remember pathetically, Judith Balzo, women are sometimes more radical than men here. She went to the end, she was almost a kind of a paranoiacally overblown Badiou, when she said, you remember, even rumors are state, you know, like everything that is state, But isn't it a paradox that not only the main point of his actual political activity, but almost the only serious field of his political work is to enable those not integrated into the states to be integrated into the states as full citizens? I find this slightly a paradox. Or somebody who then makes his entire career on subtraction from the state, not to mention another fact. This really hurt him when I told him this. You know, struggle for the immigrants, but are we aware of the, how should I put it, ideological political contradictions here? If you read some simplified pseudo-leftists, you would have thought that anti-immigrant politics is a big capital plot. No, sorry, I claim 80% of, if I may use this stupid percentage, resentment of immigrants is a spontaneous local working class reaction. If anything, those in power are much more tolerant. Those in power even for purely economic, for double reasons. First, for purely economic reasons, enough foreign workers, lowers, blah, 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 you know, and point two, for ideological advantage. Upper class liberal capitalists like politically correct topic was the danger show, you see, we are really more enlightened, more feminist, more anti-racist. They like the image of a typical racist as this, redneck, primitive, working class in the United States, and so on and so on. No? So here I see problems. But what you said again, we would have gone too much into it. The way properly to do it would have been, but unfortunately, I don't have time today. I claim nonetheless this, that when Foucault plays this game of, you know, every power, resistance to power, and so on, his problem is, and I think this is why he passed to History of Sexuality 2 and 3. If you think to the end his model from Discipline and Punish and History of Sexuality, you get a kind of a total closure. Power generates resistance, every resistance is already part of power, so it's all self-enclosed, as it were. And then the whole problem is that what then later I claimed, he did think, he at least started to use the terms that you used yesterday. That when from some point of resistance you scramble, the whole point should be put like this. Is, as you used the term yesterday, I liked it because I like scrambled text, that if you individual scrambles the game of power, is this also part of this power generates its resistance, or is there a genuine resistance? Or to put it in a different way, what I'm afraid is that if you put it in these terms, every power, resistance to power generates this perfect closure, and of course it goes both ways. You can say that every resistance to power is generated by power, but you can also say that every resistance needs power to have someone to resist, so that they mutually support each other. I think this notional couple is too abstract. I think the differences get blurred all too easily here. First, I think that I doubt if I claim that, now this will sound as some kind of a boring historicist Marxism and so on, but I claim that the first thing to do is to introduce some differences here. State power, this power, that power, not just, I don't like this.
That's the thing, that he puts it like he says that none of the particular forms of power, economic power, state power, are external, that it's all...
Okay, then I ask you a simple question.
That power is always a relation, and I think, okay, to put it in more concrete terms, Iran today, I mean, I think that it's the best example, and what you were saying yesterday, your empirical anecdotes about how the communism was in many Eastern European countries, you know, it was basically over, and people only realized it years later. Well, I think that's exactly an example of this. That basically power is not an attribute, and it's not that communism was over at some point and then people realized it. It's that basically people awoke
Sorry.
People
that's enough.
No,
Got the point. There you go.
But you see, precisely, I think that if you read closely, and I
exercise.
Come on.
Yeah,
There are more people in this room.
For me, the problem is following one. So I think that the way to read Foucault's engagement in Iran, which it's crucial, if I remember correctly, the dates comes after history of sexuality, no?
Yes.
History of sexuality was when, mid-70s, I don't know when, no?
Yeah.
So it's after.
Exactly afterwards.
Yeah, exactly afterwards, yeah. I don't think he saw in Khomeini revolution just a resistance engendered by power and so on. No, it's clear from how he writes that he thought a genuine externality, a totally different mode. I absolutely don't think, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, that he saw death as just another in this interplay of power, resisting to power and so on. He thought that something genuinely different was generated there.
Absolutely clear. You've got a question.
No, it's not so clear to me, but okay.
I just want to say on that point, I think...
sorry, which point?
Just when you were talking about power and
sorry, yeah.
I see it's quite a simple thing in Lacan, isn't it? Just the knot of real imagining symbolic, and the le symptom, the archaic version of symptom, which is just the importance of the symptom, necessary to keep binding the symbolic and imagining real together, and that also creates the symptom, and it's a necessary relationship, but they are in an agonistic relationship. Isn't it just a simple way of tying the whole group together?
But here I nonetheless act, and here I see a problem in Lacan himself. I nonetheless, a similar problem as I see in Foucault, I also see in Lacan, in the sense of, okay, you have a knot, it all hangs together and so on, but can we change it? What are the coordinates? It's never... What I want to avoid is precisely this typically postmodern closure where you say every radical change just reproduces totalitarianism even stronger and so on and so on. What I see in Lacan is the space he succeeded to delineate. It's just the space from tradition. He saw very well that what is emerging today, here I agree with him, is no longer the traditional patriarchal authority. But already there, for me, problems begin. He called this, what comes after, university discourse. Now, it's typical how he oscillates. Whatever change happens, he likes to conceptualize it as a shift from master's discourse to university discourse. Then for him, Hegel was this shift, then French Revolution was this shift, then he says explicitly that Soviet Union is the reign of university discourse. At the end, he even claims that the 68 was the path. You know what I mean? It is as if this frame, this conceptual frame, passage from masters to university discourse, is too poor to do all this. So I think that there are potentials in Lacan's theory and he tries in practice to confront this in his, what I ironically call Leninist text. All these confused texts about how to reorganize his psychoanalytic school. Is a collective possible outside these coordinates? Neither master's discourse nor university discourse whose truth is still the master. He was struggling with this all the time. So again, I'm not here pulling the cheap Judith Butler trick, of Lacan patriarchal and so on and so on. No, he went much further. But nonetheless, I think that something remains unthought there. Lacan didn't give us the solution. He left very much the field open. The way I read the last Lacan, by last I mean last 10 years, it's a kind of a desperate looking around. Miller, although one cannot always rely on him, demonstrated this very well. I think if you look at his last sentence, he tries knots, he tries this, it's kind of an absolutely desperate look for a formula. In some years it looks as if desire is bad, desire is subordinated to law, and he tries to somehow rehabilitate more drive. Then he changes again, and so on and so on. So I agree with you that in Lacan you do find a theory of power which although it's not as popular, widely used in social sciences as that of Foucault, is extremely useful to analyze what is going on today. Because what is going on today, the only one who tried to prolong Foucault, you know, Deleuze wrote a very short essay where he claimed that today's power is no longer this discipline and punish, it's digital control and so on and so on. It's a nice idea, but I don't think he really developed it. It's kind of a brief journalistic idea. This brings me, sorry, I'm not taking too much of your time, to this simple problem, modesty. To be very brutal, I don't think we really know what is going on today. That's my very modest conclusion. We have all these fast food solutions, Anthony Giddens, second modernity, whatever. This is still theoretical journalism for me. We don't yet know what effectively is going on today. And this would be my true criticism of Jacques-Alain Miller. That at a certain point, some 10, 15 years ago, he also became too much of a journalist. He started writing these short political comments which read a kind of a, sometimes even slightly ridiculous, quick comments. You know, no wonder he's publishing them now in center-right press in France. His main, where he publishes Miller now, his public interventions are Le Point and Le Figaro. We know where they are. And I think that this, but again, I think it's not just his contingent political orientation, which is never contingent, but I think there is, again, a deeper problem there. He fell into this trap of, as if he is afraid that psychoanalysis will be somehow behind its time and tried quickly, you know, Obama, oh, he had a theory, which was totally wrong, I think, that Obama's success is the success of this primitive messianic figure, I will bring you deliverance and so on, which is totally wrong, I think. American friends of mine immediately reacted to me and told me that with all my critique of Obama, one thing is good about him. McCain and others were this primitive messianic. We have bad guys, rid of the bad guys, we will solve things. What's nice, basic message of Obama was simply, we are in deep shit. We cannot simply point to the rich of Wall Street, they are guilty. There is simply a hard, concrete work to be done, and so on and so on. So if it's a totally wrong analysis. Another ridiculous mistake he made. As many stupid, sexually frustrated Frenchmen, he immediately fell in love with Sarah Palin. And he wrote one of the most stupid analyses of why she is unbeatable. He clearly predicted her victory, claiming that, okay, it was even up to a point a nice theory, that she enacted a kind of a post-feminist women's assertion without any guilt, and so on and so on. But again, it was totally wrong as an analysis. So I think that he's losing nerves. What worries me is not that he is too arrogant, that tragically, he doesn't trust enough his own Lacanian theory. You know, he's under this pressure, oh my God, we will be accused of being back on our time so quickly, a theory of this, a theory of that, and so on and so on. He should have this trust, you know. Lacan was God's voice, history is on our side. A little bit more of this, you know. Sorry. Last question, then I will drop it.
Yeah, last question.
No last question.
Okay, well, I've got
confronted with silence.
I've got one. I would tend to agree with your analysis of Chakravarti insofar as he seems to mobilize, the West's guilt against itself. But then you end up identifying with Fanon.
Yeah.
And Fanon radicalizes Europe in a much more radical sense. I mean, for Fanon, there is not just a question of a superego injunction. Fanon kind of invents this idea that there is also an under-ego. And that's where the black colonized consciousness is. You know, the wretched of the earth should have not been translated. The wretched is the damned. And the damned is, you fall. When you fall, you fall. Not to the edges of humanity, where, according to Susan Book-Morse and yourself, one can see the cracks and so on. You fall under You fall under the line of humanity, you fall under the line of civilization. This is not just the edge, this is the other side.
Wait a minute.
And then you come back from there.
Fanon was a good Sartrean, and he knew that this falling under is the only way to effectively be universally human.
Precisely, but if so, the first thing that happens in order for that new universe or new world, the new man that he talked about to appear is the shattering of all the coordinates of the previous world. So in that sense, you're not only provincializing Europe, but all the lines which divide the world and which give us the present situation.
But you know what would be my answer? A very simple one. This idea to posit a new universal world by shattering all the foundations. This is the very core of Christian European heritage. He was the greatest Eurocentrist that I can imagine, Fanon, to put it very briefly. Because again, I know you find also in other religions this idea of, destruction, renewal, but this is a cyclic thinking. You know, this sheet of, how are the stupid god birds, phoenix, whatever, those idiots who burn and then rise again and so on. We are not talking about this here. The new order will not be the repetition of the previous order. It's something much more radical. Basically, he's doing what I tried to do here. Did I do it here or somewhere? I think I did it here, yes, the first day even. Apropos of Tertullian, this idea, we need dark ages. We need dark ages.
That again provincializes Europe. I mean, the beauty about the Dark Ages is that...
No, wait a minute.
There is no Europe.
I'm nonetheless an honest anti-Eurocentrist universe.
But if so, you have to drop your claim towards Eurocentrism.
No, what I will say is that's the greatness of Europe. It provides perfect tools for its own burial. That's what Europe is offering. Which is literally true. Look at India. Sorry, you can now correct me. But the way I see it, that what is Congress Party? Isn't Congress Party originally rich Indians who went to Oxford? Exactly. And you know which is my formative stuff here? Did you read Aldous Huxley Jesting Pilatus? It's wonderful. He, in the 20s already, back 1920s, he traveled to India. And he describes his contacts with English colonizers. And already he was stricken by the idea how much more the British colonizers all admired this wise, poor Indian man. With all this shit, how our vulgar Western technological civilization, how much wiser this man, how much more satisfied is their simple life in their simplicity. But the moment there was an Indian who wanted to study Western technology to out-Westernize them, the fun was over. Yeah. So this is what fascinated me. The true anti-colonialism is neither we have our shitty origins, nor we can also be good like you is. No, we can be more you than yourself. You are not yourself enough. We can outdo you.
The Haitians singing La Marseillaise.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Yes, that's what fascinates me always. Sorry, now I
brilliant. We have finished in the precise point. Great way to finish. You have witnessed Slavoj recanting of his Eurocentrism. No. So you're not allowed to reply.
I'm aware what is happening now. You remember, when did I do this? Yesterday or before? That story about Moltke. You remember, the general who... Yeah. He now wants to be the king, I concluded, but he wants to say, you officially conclude.
Your Majesty, you have ended in victory.
No, No, you are the Majesty. You wanted to be now who said, okay, we won, but I want to state it formally. I had a great victory.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Please
much.
join me. But in fact, Slavoj, there is no need to learn that discipline from the right-wingers. If you read every single autobiography by revolutionaries in Latin America and elsewhere, you find that tension.
Totally agree. Even when I developed this in my book to confirm you, that famous speech of Che Guevara that everybody quotes about revolution love. Immediately afterwards, he goes precisely into this topic. He was deeply aware of it.
Yeah, and he knew.
And what
his sons, daughters, and so on.
and what I'm trying to tell you is that, don't misunderstand me, this doesn't mean that then you become some kind of without emotions killing monster or whatever. Sometimes this is the true heroism. No, you do something which takes you out in the sense, no return to normal life. And that's for me the true heroism. To, in a way, pathetically, to be a living dead already, you know. You renounce your right to live forever happily on whatever.
I have plenty of questions, but
deep in your shitty mind.
Sorry, but let us
poetical expression.
Where there is perhaps tension between what you're saying and Foucault is in the sense that that he introduces an ambiguity into this relationship.
Can you be more precise here?
Sorry?
Can you be more precise here?
Well, the ambiguity is that power both creates the subject, but the subject can also at the same time invert that relationship and be an instrument of power. And that's why he says that power is everywhere and comes from everywhere.
Sorry, can you specify, because this is, sorry for interrupting, but I just want you to make it clear. Because you say power both creates the subject and makes the subject an instrument. Where is the tension here?
And then the subject can twist it back.
At the same time become an instrument of power as the subject created by power. I mean,
in what sense can she become an instrument of power? In the sense that he's just an instrument of power.
Okay, going back to what somebody in the back yesterday was saying about India. Because I think that what he was saying, the way I understood it, I think he was agreeing with me. But I think that perhaps...
he's here, so he might tell us if that's
correct. The idea, I mean, this is how the British ruled India. I mean, for example, where I think Foucault is even more radical than you are in this sense. Like, I think he goes even further. Because his hypothesis with respect to, although he doesn't specifically address it that I'm aware of, but with respect to multiculturalism would be that it's not just that, you know, those in power use the ideology of multiculturalism to rule, but actually it was the technique of power, multiculturalism, even before it was the official ideology. So what the British did in India was effectively a kind of multiculturalism. Because
wait a minute, I've written about it, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, but that to me would be a Foucauldian analysis.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, but that's my point, how to break out of it.
But this is what I'm saying, that what they did in India was basically emphasize local particular identities. You know, you are Sikh, they wouldn't speak to, you know, say, any pan-Indian representatives. They would only communicate and negotiate.
Okay, guys.
Now I come to a paradox. Would you agree?
Otherwise, you will talk forever.
The way to resist English was to return to them their own message, to become more like them. To say no.
This is the core of his thesis in the history of sexuality.
In volume 1.
Yeah, in volume 1.
How then? No, I'm asking you now.
He's denouncing the repressive hypothesis.
I know, but now I'm asking you a simple question which I don't get. I ask many Foucauldians, and typically I always get different, inconsistent answers. The crucial question is this one, the way I see it. Is there a break or not between, on the one hand, history and sexuality, and before it, surveiller tenir, what's the translation here? Control.
Discipline and punish.
Discipline and punish.
Sorry?
Discipline and punish.
Within that book and the way I see it, History of Sexuality, Volume 1, where you have this idea of, let's call it total immanence. Law itself produces its transgression and so on. And what happens in History of Sexuality, point 2 and 3. The way I see it is that, so will you then say that all this idea of aesthetic, self-creating, care of self, that this is just the way power reproduces itself through you?
But that's the thing. I think that the difference.
Shit poetry. But let us open up the room for discussion. I mean, I'm sure there are quite a few things happened here today, so
maybe don't exaggerate.
Again, our friend.
Well, I just wanted to bring up the point again from yesterday, but I guess it relates. Yeah. I think, I mean, it relates to what was said today as well, I think. Because I think that, okay, well, your point about like how this idea of self-reinvention and multiple identities and all this, how it fits in perfectly with capitalism. But I mean, my response to that would be that in this sense, you are totally in agreement with Foucault. Like this isn't something where you're because to me, what Foucault is saying is precisely that the struggle against power, that basically the subject is both the effect and instrument of power. So basically power constitutes multiple subjects, multiple identities. I mean,